The world is changed.
I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth.
Shadow and flame.
I'm going to Mordor alone.
Of course you are. And I'm coming with you.
Slinak, Yolukraden, Kill Inudu. Only because Dortaku,
Remember what Bilbo used to say? It's a dangerous business, Frodo.
Going out your door.
Stupid fat hobbit.
Frodo, Samwise, Sam, Frodo, Sam, Frodo, Samwise. Frodo, Samwise, Sam.
This is War of the Ring. Wait, no, not this War of the Ring, hold on. Rather, we have the card game, War of the Ring, the card game, which is a derivative of War of the Ring, the board game. Let's do a flashback on that. In 2004, Lord of the Ring fans were blessed with this, a sweeping war game of presenting the entirety of the trilogy. It had the Fellowship moving the ring to the crack of doom, the Shadow trying to conquer Middle-earth before that happened, and tons of thematic nods like Free People troops permanently dying when slain, goodbye dwindling elf population. But that game was a monstrosity to learn, and its scope isn't for everyone. So now we have some of that magic bottled up in a card game that only takes about 2 hours instead of 4+ with the board game. War of the Ring, the card game, is kind of the same premise, the good people versus evil. You fight over the strongholds of Middle-earth, manage armies of different factions, and go on a type of path to Mount Doom. But this is a 2v2 game now, where the Free People have the Gondor and Elves in one deck, Rohan Hobbits and everyone else in the other, then the Shadow have Mordor in one deck, and Saruman and everything else that isn't Mordor in the other. We're gonna call this War of the Ring CG for brevity for the rest of the review, and when I say Free People, I'm referring to the good guy team. When I say Shadow, I'm referring to the bad guy evil team. And then we're mostly going to be discussing the main mode of this game called the Trilogy mode, the 2v2 standard mode, but we have played some 1v1. One last thing for real, we will be comparing this to the board game throughout this review, but mostly in cons and scoring. But now let's get to how to play. The goal of the game is to have the most victory points from these cards called locations. You have battlegrounds and paths. When the last numbered path card gets resolved, the game ends. Free people get points by properly defending their path cards and winning battlegrounds. The Shadow are trying to attack path cards and also win battlegrounds. You flip one battleground around through its text and see who is attacking or defending it. At round end, you'll actually do the fight, and if the attacker has more swords, they get the battleground, that's VP. However, defending units don't contribute to the battle unless they're eliminated to add their shields, meaning those cards will be removed from the game permanently. Attacking cards always get eliminated after the combat no matter what. Paths are similar, note how there's a number restriction for cards going on them. Little twist here though is that if the Shadow win on the attack, they get victory points equal to the difference of their attack and the Free People's defense. Now with those types of locations explained, the first thing you need to know about rounds is that you take turns doing one action each. Eventually everyone will pass and then you see who wins each location. But before you get carried away with all these cards in your hand, there's one really important rule. Every time you drop something from your hand, you have to discard another card from your hand as a cost. This is called cycling. Now all you need to know is 5 actions. 1. Play a card, either to a location or in front of you to a place called a reserve. 2. Move a dude from reserve to a location as long as you didn't play it in reserve this round. 3. Use card text that says, this is an action. 4. Flip your once per game ring token to draw 2 cards. 5. Eliminate 2 cards from your hand permanently to draw a card. Oh, okay, I lied. There's one more action, voluntarily cycling, aka discarding a card as an action, but you rarely do this. Also, instead of doing an action, you can choose to pass if you have 2 or less cards, or you can pass if both your opponents have more cards than you in their hand. Once every single player passes back to back, you see who wins each location, then you just draw 3 to 4 cards depending if you're good or evil. Then you pass the starting player, flip locations for the next round, and do it all again. One last thing, which is some cards will activate paths mid-round, which means you can immediately commence fighting on it. Whoever wins it just gets the path points like normal. You then get another path depending on what the card says, and that will give points like normal at the end of the round, so you will have to fight over that too. Activating battlegrounds means you just grab another battleground that's not in play and then put it in play. If reactivating a battleground, you take it from someone's scoring area, whoa, that means you fight over this again. So then you can have board states with multiple battlegrounds in play, but you can only have one path in play at a time. That's the game. You're mostly just playing one card from your hand as an action to somewhere on the board or reserve. Once everyone passes, you duke it out on the battlefields, battlegrounds, Edoras, Helm's Deep, Minas Tirith, all that Lord of the Rings stuff. So now on to pros. Starting with components, yeah, this game's pretty polished there with a fantastic insert, sturdy cardboard chits if you need to keep track of things. Then cards feel sturdy and good whether they're smaller or bigger. And the art, come on Tolkien fans, just soak in all this awesome visual goodness. Locations from Bag End to Amon Hen to Osgiliath look great. And this is just the path cards. Battlegrounds also look pretty cool, different artists though, different styles here. The 4 decks of 30 cards each are jam-packed with awesome art too. Heroic Gondor warriors, mounted Rohan, teensy hobbits, all are immediately eye-catching. And there's 0 duplicates of character cards, with few duplicates of armies, meaning there's just so much diversity of art. Okay, sure, they did borrow some art from the original War of the Ring for my boy Saruman and my King Aragorn and his Ranger version and Gandalf 2.0 and Schmeagol, but not really a big deal and happy to see there's so much new art. Then there's flavor text on a good amount of the simpler cards and it reads very, very well. Speaking of the original War of the Ring, that game was insanely hard to learn. It's like the rulebook and the player aids were some type of archaically worded parchment that were actively gatekeeping the play. See me over here? Yeah, happy to report that learning this War of the Ring is mostly good with the rulebook, with good examples, good use of space, fantastic card breakdown, etc, etc. This is helped by the good player aid that explains all the symbols and slightly differentiated for the opposing teams here. And seeing how the game is just 4 decks of cards here and 3 decks of cards here, they don't really need to be set up in a specific order, and yeah, this game is really easy to set up and get going. So let's get to gameplay pros, and we're actually going to start with all the cool abilities and interactions in the game. See, War of the Ring CG does have some army cards in the game, but actually it's dominated by character effects, and these feel very, very fitting for Lord of the Rings. For the free people, how about Gandalf, who says, "You shall not frickin' pass on a path," and then he just gets a new one? Or how about these cheeky hobbitsies that have some way to help paths without permanently dying? Or use their helpful cards like Sting, a mithril coat, or all this food-related stuff for second breakfast. Mix some herbs and stewed rabbit to bring back a hungry hobbit to your hand from discard. Or actually, just do that with Eowyn. She can straight up just bring back Merry or Pippin from the discard when played. Or how she's freaking awesome and can help kill Nazgul when she is played to some battleground. Back at Gondor, Denethor is calling up his son from the deck as an action. I mean the other son, the better one. Yeah, there we go from the deck. Or the king just gets better when his dearly beloved is in play. But maybe you don't need that romance because the Undead Ghost Army is an amazingly statted unit if Aragorn is in the same space. There's just so many of these. Legolas gets his bow from the deck, or the Phial of Galadriel to get Frodo or Sam more defense on a path. Or Gondor calls for aid in the Red Arrow, letting Rohan troops actually support them in battle. Yeah, for the interest of time, let's just move on to the Shadow. And how else to say evil but Nazgul? You have all 9 Nazgul ready to do Sauron's bidding, each with different abilities to pester the free people. Obviously, the Witch King is the best here too. Oh, he's looking a little outnumbered here, just give him a mantle to make sure he doesn't die. Or if he's really gonna lose a fight, just spew out bad breath to run away and still get a victory point. And Nazgul feel mobile with the Black Rider's mount and Fell Beast, overriding their movement sickness if they were played this round to reserve and then something changed on the board so they need to move out. The other Shadow deck has Wormtongue, who can eliminate himself to straight up kill Theoden. Holy moly, that's evil. Then you obviously have Saruman and his little magical evil black globe to speed up their attack by drawing 3 cards every turn, then keeping only 1, the others are discarded or eliminated. Or screw it, let's just move Saruman himself to an attack on Helm's Deep, then use Woven of all colors for when he dies in an attack to just discard him instead. All the cool card interactions are paired with the weight of a cycling system where, remember, every time you want to play a card, you need to discard something. So maybe I want to play Riders of Rohan to defend Helm's Deep, Well, I still need to discard something to do that. Should I discard this mithril coat that hugely busts Frodo and Sam when I don't have Frodo and Sam in my hand? Is this mithril coat going to be overkill even if I do draw Frodo and Sam with my 20 or so cards left in my deck? Look at this Gandalf reliant card, Theoden. You can happily discard him if you realize that both Gandalf cards are in your discard. And when your deck gets reset, then Gandalf and Theoden can hook up. Or you can set up your hand to do a super efficient play to play Gimli discarding his axe. Then Gimli snatches that Dwarven Axe back into your hand. It's like playing Gimli was free. As you get better at the game, you'll start evaluating which cards are worth cycling at what part of the game. Like these cards aren't going to do anything for me just sitting in reserve just now, they'll do better when I draw them later. There's a constant progression of constantly reevaluating your deck as you start to lose some steam as certain cards like strong characters die permanently. And then if you know that certain characters die, well then you can start eliminating some of their complementary cards from the deck. And this is where the winnow action comes in really well, where you can eliminate 2 cards from your hand to draw a card, which is a really nice way to manually fix your hand and keep rounds smooth. Here's some really fun stuff that can happen when you fix your deck well. Like in one game, we had the Saruman deck down to 15 cards and got to use Golem multiple times a game, which by activating Pass lets the Shadow choose when to score them and trigger Shadow Path abilities when the number favors them. Or how the same happened for the Witch King card here, which allowed the Witch King to reactivate battlegrounds that were taken throughout the game. Reactivating Lorien activates Dom Guldur again. Look at that combo. Then you can do this again when you draw the event later. We gotta put a focus on the asymmetry, where everyone's unique deck is also paired with some differing team playstyles. So the free people actually have control over the length of the game, since they have a lot of path activation cards that will activate the next path in this stack, which is the timer in the game. But then the Shadow get hugely rewarded for stacking up big attacks on pass, because remember, they get points there by how much they win by. So you can totally just send in a bunch of Nazgul to get a ton of points, but don't do this too early because attackers always die. So the Shadow has to evaluate when to stack a bunch of Nazgul. Shadow also straight up has a lot more card draw because they have a built-in 1 more card draw every turn. But also, Sauron has 2 of these +1 draw cards every round. The free people decks only have Aragorn or Gandalf the White for a +1 draw, but they have to be careful in playing these because they'll kill off Strider or Gandalf the Grey, which have incredible once per game abilities. It's not surprising for Sauron to draw 6 cards a turn, while free people draw like 3 cards. Pair this increased card draw with all these locations and events that let you draw more off the top of the deck, and Sauron can go through his deck incredibly fast. In one game, he already reset his deck by the time round 2 rolled around. This lets Sauron have a good idea of what's left in his deck very early on, letting him plan long-term strategy clearer. The Shadow can also play this attrition control game, since they can keep forsaking free people cards, and even forcing opponent discards through the Beguiler, who is an incredible Nazgul to spam to reduce free people action possibilities. Going from 4 cards to 3 cards is no joke because of the cost to play every card. This Nazgul also doesn't eliminate itself after being used for the ability, so you can combo with this other Nazgul to do it again and again. And sure, the other Shadow deck is more of a ragtag nature, but that doesn't mean they can't still launch huge attacks on Rohan places with Saruman and his Uruk-hai. Or play incredibly strong monster cards, but only on where they would thematically be in Middle-earth. Then the Sutherlings are poised to activate so many of the Gondor battlegrounds to launch sneak attacks when you want. The free people are a little more flexible with their characters, using stuff like the 3 hunters to move these heroes to any battleground in the game, or the Shadowfax/Old Man combo to activate or reactivate any battleground in the game. And there's lots of thematic teamwork as the elf deck plays magic items to help the Hobbitsies. You can really see the difference in team priorities in Path 6, which is a huge contention for both teams. The Shadow wants to use Golem to spam the Shadow favored effects, whereas the free people are trying to speed up the game and move the path to 7 as fast as possible. Path 7s are all free people favored, and they can use this Gondor homie to start scoring them for free. The next gameplay pro is a general passing structure for 4 players. See, War of the Ring CG is a careful tug of war on locations. It's filled with mind games of how much your opponent can play to a certain place, battlefield, or path before the round ends. After all, you can't move stuff after you played it, so you gotta be really sure you can win a fight once you commit troops there. So all 4 players are trying their hardest to temporarily pass to see what their opponents do, then reacting to all that on their next turn. But to get your hand size low enough, you may have to play cards in reserve that you can't move at all this round, so make sure they're worth playing there. Maybe it's worth increasing your hand size, aka carryover limit, to pass earlier in rounds. Each deck has a way to boost this. Then quantity of cards is a little deceptive, since there's cards that let you draw other cards. Or if you activate a new path or battleground, you may just draw a bunch of cards. maybe make both players on your team draw a card. Alternatively, you can decide to suddenly put a lot of pressure on certain areas of the board by moving in your previously played reserve troops to try to force a past opponent to unpass and use their once per game ring to draw more cards to see if they can defend the areas. We cannot stress enough that a key occurrence of the game is one of your opponents passing with just 2 cards in hand, then pretending they're done for the round, but they're really not. They're waiting for their teammate to set up something for them. And maybe they have the dreaded +3 attack cards remaining in their hand, or maybe they'll use that reserve ability soon to activate a stronghold to put more VP into contention this round. Last gameplay pro is the reactivating battlegrounds mechanic, where this can cause some swings mid to late game because it's taking out already scored battlegrounds and putting them up for contest again. So think of this 3-point Minas Tirith going from one side to the other. So even if you have battlegrounds in your scored area, that doesn't mean you won't ever fight over them ever again. Keeping both teams on their feet about which battlegrounds have been scored and which ones they can't afford to give up now, and then maybe reactivate it again later. Like for Minas Tirith, what if the Shadow devotes so many troops to it, and then you just kind of let them have Minas Tirith for now, and then all these attacking troops die, then later on you reactivate it, and they don't have the troops to take it again, so now it's yours, your 3 points. And this whole reactivating battlegrounds idea is also pretty freaking thematic because, let's talk about that. Oh, I have to set this up. In the actual War of the Ring board game, Helm's Deep can be won by the Rohan defenders once, and they think they have the points secured from that, and then Saruman reactivates it again when he's ready by moving all his troops out and then getting Helm's Deep, and now he has the point swing of Helm's Deep points. Then for logistics, War of the Ring, the card game, has good replayability, especially if you're playing it 2v2 with 4 actual people. That means you'll have an entirely new deck to handle each game, where each deck is fairly deep in how you want to pace good character drops, interact with the other deck, and also forsake. There's also 3 different paths for each number of 1 through 9, so the combinations in which they come out is going to vary, and with their defending values and abilities, you'll card play a bit differently. Same goes for the battlegrounds, which come out randomly from their decks of 7. So maybe one game or thought comes out in round 2 to grab Saruman from the deck, and that's a different game. Final pro is that the theme meets gameplay pretty well for this game considering it's just cards. So hobbits always go on pass and they never die, they escape death. Or maybe stuff like the Mouth of Sauron cannot go on a path if there's a active battleground being fought over, like his home. And we have to stress again, the character abilities just check out. Or how Nazgul really do feel like special generals that are ready to do the Dark Lord's bidding, with many of them being used again and again throughout the game. And then when the time is right to strike, they are played in force to a battleground or path. Cards. Okay, so for first off, visuals. The location text is too small. If it's gonna be this small, why not double the text on both sides? Here, I'll just put it on screen so you can see it clearly. If you're playing with 4 players, you're probably going to be further out from the locations, sitting at a fairly larger table. Then there's some visuals regarding paths that kept tripping us up. Like, why are the path defense icons so similar to the normal defense icons? Why not make these different colors if the outline looks so similar? Then there's plenty of shadow cards that get something when played on a certain path, like Shelob is best on her layer, and the path number should have been shown on that so you can actually plan for that early game. And while it doesn't seem like a big deal at first, not having a way to keep track of points scored was extremely annoying. Mid-game, there's constantly asking of one another, oh hey, how many points do you have? Let's take a look at your stack of cards. And then the shadow only getting points from pass via corruption tokens adds an extra step to counting up. Not sure why they couldn't have just added a VP tracker like how War of the Ring did. The last rulebook-ish con is that they decided to use activate for 2 different things in the game, strongholds and pass. But strongholds and paths being activated mean much different things. It's confusing because activating a path means fighting on it and then just getting a new one, whereas activating a stronghold battleground means you just add another one onto the game. You don't actually resolve any combat yet. Now onto gameplay cons, and we have to start with how randomness is handled. Yes, this is a card game where there's always going to be some degree of randomness with card draws or card flipped, but War of the Ring CG is a little severe in its handling of randomness in many areas. First are the battlegrounds, you know, where you're forced to fight with different VP payouts. Well, these are flipped randomly every round. Like, you might have asked yourself, what if Minas Tirith gets flipped over round 1? Well, this 3-point battleground is going to be pretty hard for the Shadow to get with its defense and free people helping ability. For most troops in the game, you'll need between 2 to 3 of them to get over Minas Tirith's base defense value, and the troops have to match the battleground type. This is a lot to ask for on the first turn, so the Shadow has to essentially give it up, giving free people an early VP lead, putting the burden on the Shadow to maybe reactivate it later to have a chance of getting it, but that costs resources to do so. Conversely, it is really quite good for Shadow if Orthanc gets flipped over round 2, and they can take Saruman from their deck into their hand. But what if Saruman was in your hand already? This ability basically does nothing. Or how about getting Minas Morgul early to get a free Nazgul play to reserve? That's good. What if you get the Witch King? That's super good. What if you get nothing? Oh, useless ability. Basically, I'm saying that battlegrounds can make one side's chances of winning or losing easier or harder just based off of a single card flip in a game that averages 90 minutes to 120 minutes. If we look at paths, these aren't perfect either. Some are definitely stronger than others in the same category, but their abilities just aren't as swingy. And you draw 1 out of 3 in a single path category versus strongholds, you're drawing 1 from 7 early game, and that becomes 1 from 6, and then later 1 of 5. It's not really easy to plan around.
Frodo.
Then some opening hands are going to be straight up better than others. See, every single deck has a card that +1s them every single turn by letting them draw 1 more card. So if you open that card, well, then you just plop in your reserve early, bam, you got that +1 engine going for the rest of the game. If the other team draws their +1s and your team doesn't, well then your team is just behind on card advantage. It's not like you can press an early attack because they're playing something like this round 1, because they typically wouldn't be sent for early game path combat or battlegrounds. And then round 1, you don't see any big plays anyways because you don't have that much firepower in cards. If free people open Strider and Gandalf the Grey in each team's opening hand, they're well on their way to advancing the path end, which is their main win condition, and you want to use these abilities ASAP before playing Aragorn or Gandalf the White, which would remove them. You don't want to eliminate cards from your small deck unless you really have to. And you know how to play any card you must cycle another card? Well, that's card inflation, meaning you're basically paying 2 cards to play 1, making cards where you conditionally go through a deck not that healthy. These 2 cards can be really good, especially because you can get 2 cards off of them. But what if you draw 0 of what you're looking for? Then you just played 1 card, discarded another to get literally nothing, which feels absolutely terrible. The 2 free people equivalents to these shadow drawing events are Eomer and Theoden, but if you fail them, you still have a dude on a board with some upside. So not sure why these shadow cards don't let you draw more so they don't poop out. Then items are a very feast or famine type of card, where they can be good to amazing if you get to play them on a very specific character, but useless otherwise and are discard fodder. Feasting looks like Frodo gets mithril armor on a path, the one item that is equipped to him. And hoo-doo-doo, it's super inefficient for the Shadow to put 4 cards to free people's 2 to overcome 3 defense. Or on the Shadow, there's all these items and even an event that can only be used on Saruman, so make sure Saruman isn't on the bottom of your deck, and even tutoring him with Wormtongue is not an efficient or reliable play. And we have some more specific non-items, like the Great Gate, or the Dead Man of Dunharrow, which is of course only good on Minas Tirith and next to Aragorn respectively. Or Shelob, who can only be played on paths 7 through 9, so she's probably discard fodder for most of the game. I'm not saying that these are inherently bad cards to have in a game. They have really big thematic upside, but are just a double-edged sword in undercutting decision making if you draw them at the wrong time. In a game with hand draws between 3 to 5 cards on average, these can feel like dead weight, especially becoming discard fodder if their complement is removed from the game or is in a small discard pile. In some rounds, you might find that you can only do really only one thing, maybe it's even sometimes the reserve, and then you just pass, which can feel pretty dull if you're playing a 2v2 game where you just have to sit there and then just keep passing while everyone else does cool things. If your entire side doesn't have the right cards for locations, well then your opponent can sometimes just get these cards for free. If they're defending, defenders win ties. They get it. What could help alleviate all this unhealthy randomness? Well, you could play with the next battleground flipped over to give you at least some planning for the next round. And for all the specific cards, we would have you draw 2 more cards in each round, then immediately cycle 2, which would help reduce bad hands and give more agency every round. Yet this would run into the issue of making your deck reset faster, which might be too fast for what the game is going for, so maybe some number tweaking there is necessary. Let me know if you try it. Going off of randomness, let's go a bit into the Forsake mechanic, where it's playing with a little too much fire on what can get Forsaken off the top of a deck. The free people are already behind on card advantage and are trying to pressure the Shadow early to end the game, so they're going to do top of deck most likely. But then when forsaking off of a deck, well, anything can kind of happen with these interdependent cards, and the game isn't multifaceted or long enough to recover well if you lose a really key card early, like Shadowfax or any Fellowship Hobbit. Obviously, Shadow can't see what gets forsaken since that would be too strong, so there are some mind games here for free people to play, but free people getting so hurt off of 3 really bad forsakes in a game is upsetting. This mechanic again works, it's just steeped in so much randomness. Like there are ways to look at the top card of your deck, or you could always decide to forsake something from reserve. Maybe if you forsake off the top of your deck, you pick 2 and then forsake 1, cycle the other. We've just had some bum games where free people lose a card and it's like, oh, should we just reset? Okay, we have the most fascinating con here, which is War of the Ring the card game does a poor job of setting up the right expectations. Let's start with Frodo's marketed role in this game. The shadow must strike quickly and decisively, or try to slowly corrupt Frodo, burdening him with wounds, toil, and blah 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 blah. The rulebook also says the same thing. This is really a case of trying to sell the IP too hard, because Frodo is a single character card, which you don't see that often, maybe on 4 paths maximum if you play him very efficiently. Oh, and then at no point is the One Ring itself a mechanic where Frodo is getting corrupted by it. No, corruption is just a generic VP that the Shadow get. So yeah, for the board game fans, this game is about maximizing VP on the location flips and not really charting a path to Mount Doom or going invisible with the Fellowship or anything like that. And then this other part where the Shadow must strike quickly and decisively, that makes sense. And when you think of Middle Earth, the evil is like this. You got a huge troop advantage as a Shadow and then send it out to go fight. But War of the Rings CG cannot be played like that. You have no huge starting hordes of troops, and the Shadow has the same exact deck size as the good people. Yeah, that means not that many more troops, even though they have the burden to attack first. It's common to see an early Minas Tirith or Helm's Deep flip and go like, how the heck am I supposed to get over that defense? The Shadow just surrender here even though I'm supposed to be striking early? Or how about when you see hobbits on a path? Shouldn't you be putting Nazgul on there, sending out the Deadly Nine to find the One Ring before it gets to Mount Doom? No, actually you don't want to do that in this game because Nazgul all inherently die after going on paths. And then many hobbits always survive too, so don't have the Nazgul tap themselves out too early from going on the hunt for the ring like they're thematically supposed to. It's quite unintuitive because the Shadow is actually the underdog in this game. See, they're behind on VP for most of the game, and they're sometimes struggling with troop quantity because it's their burden to launch more of the suicidal attacks. It's thematic in a way for sure. The Shadow need time to mobilize their armies, but they don't have that many army cards in the game, so they're mostly relying on their 3 attack cards to win big sieges. We were extremely confused when first playing this game, thinking that Shadow just suck. They won once out of 6 games. Then I filmed this review, and one of my good friends told me that nope, they don't suck. We were just playing them wrong. So then 2 days later, and yep, I had to change much of this script. And I've also seen plenty of people online that have the same experience as us, some as far as 3 people winning over 10 games in a row and never losing. Here's the thing, Shadow aren't weaker, just need very careful playing that goes opposite to what the back of the box says. If you're a really careful gamer, then yeah, this con won't be an issue for you and you'll find out the right strategy by just looking at all the cards and location abilities. I won't spoil the details of the strategy, but essentially as the Shadow, you can't be too concerned that free people are just beating you by a lot of victory points throughout the game. As long as you keep that below 10 points, you're good to go for the late game, especially on pass 8 and 9. This can also make the replayability of the game not as high as initially thought with all the cool cards, because once you figure out the right strategy, each side just becomes aware of what the other is trying to do. Compare this to the board game, where yes, Frodo will almost always want to get to Mount Doom, but there's a bunch of paths to get there, and there's a bunch of different areas of Middle Earth for the Shadow to choose where to mobilize against, rather than be spurred on by card flips. Our last gameplay con is the pure 2-player, which is the dual variant in the rulebook, where you mash up each team's 2 decks together and basically play the same mode. With the caveat is that you draw less cards to start the game with, where before you drew 6 or 7 and discarded 2 cards at the beginning. They do this because you have now the ring to use every round and are treated as both of your team's players for draw abilities. But even then, you're still not drawing enough to double your hand, which is where you could consistently place on all of the location flips. And even if you did draw more, there's a higher chance of randomness to go kaput because it's a single deck of 60 cards. You know there's a reason why the game was split up into 2 decks in the first place, eh? Nitpicks. The first nitpick is that there's no card count for cards in this game. even in the rulebook. This sounds like it shouldn't matter so much in a game filled with character abilities, but for army cards, it's really nice to know. Then there's the one ring that each player has. Why do they all look like the one ring? But anyways, this is a very good draw too, that basically everyone will always use. So having it only worth 1 point come end game doesn't make it worth saving. It works fine because players are playing around each other using the ring at any time, until eventually there comes a point where you don't have to because everyone has used the ring and it feels like something is missing. Could there be a way to recharge it? Or just give it at least 2 to 3 points endgame for not using it? Now it's time for a recommender score, where we try to critically evaluate the aforementioned pros and cons, with the caveat of whether or not this is even a good idea in the first place. So, War of the Ring, the card game, is going to get a 7 out of 10 from us. It is good. Without a doubt, this is a Lord of the Rings themed game with countless interactions that are going to make so many Tolkien fans so happy. You can have cool teamwork moments or just play one side by yourself and it works fine. Probably above an hour once comfortable with it, but easily 3 hours for a first 2v2 game. There's some reading and connecting the dots, but cards make sense. Wow, Devilry of Saruman for 3 attack. Yes sir, let's play it for a bit. Actually, speaking of that card making sense, there's only 2 locations you'd actually only play it on. Most likely Helm's Deep. Cards don't have the double use of the board game or the initial map to really theory craft how to use them. But these 2 things of the board game really did bog down the game length and accessibility. War of the Ring CG continues to be at odds itself by being a War of the Ring. It wants to take up the mantle of the board game's epic fights over these areas of Middle Earth. But then these fights can't be that epic because both sides, especially Shadow, have to be very careful of bleeding empty of armies. And remember, defenders just win if no one puts units there. Attackers might not show up because of how the game decides. Not the players, the game decides where you're mostly fighting. And it restricts armies in such a severe way that the board game didn't necessarily do. It was more of showing where you probably couldn't go rather than just straight up telling you, no, you can't go there. If the game put in a lot more army cards and decks to give more attacking power, then turns become more dry because you'd have a lot more boring hands with just armies, and spending the drier turns to deploy them. And also, fatter decks start diluting the chance of the cool Lord of the Ring dopamine interactions to happen, and wouldn't reward one of the awesome feelings of reusing your favorite event card or character again and again and again in a game. Actually, now that I think about Forsaking off the top of the deck, as a mechanic, were they trying to grab the same feeling of randomly sacking a member of the Fellowship in War of the Ring when something went wrong? Because you could definitely randomly sack Strider or Gandalf the Grey, which is exactly what can happen in the card game. We gotta bring up Ride to Ruin, Death. You know, this one that we showed in the intro? It is actually the epitome of War of the Ring CG. A cool sounding thematic card, promises good teamwork moments between Rohan and Gondor, but ends up needing very specific board states of Rohan helping mostly Minas Tirith. But you can't trigger this coolness consistently or even have it a winning play to trigger it, so the card could be discard fodder usually, which ends up being probably okay because of how much lighter this game wants to be. This has a lot of the board game elements that are treated like potatoes. Potatoes, yes, boil them, mash them, stick them in this stew. This stew is definitely going to taste different every game. I don't know what card draws you're going to see with the location flips, but there are moments where everything just lines up very well in War of the Ring CG. It can be a very true feeling shorter version of the board game. Speaking of games that follow a set storyline and are thematic with decks, this designer, Ian Brody, also designed Quartermaster General World War II that we reviewed a while back. And it got a recommender score of 9 out of 10 with far less randomness concerns, because you're playing with a pre-set up board, 3 decks of cards per team instead of 2, and way less specific cards. We can really see Brody deriving from himself here, where free people are actually the axis that dominate early, whereas the Shadow are like the allies that need time to mobilize and crush late game. Remember how we said the Shadow feel unintuitive despite being technically thematic at an angle? You wouldn't think they play like the allies in World War II, huh? If you do like Lord of the Rings and never got to play War of the Ring, 100% try this out. It's gonna have so many thematic highs traveling to all these places of Middle Earth, and you probably won't care if you brick some hands. But if you did play War of the Ring as a Lord of the Rings fan, this game just doesn't really have nearly the depth, movement possibilities, interesting combat mechanisms, and of course thematic what if highs, but it is definitely worth trying to see if it can be a War of the Ring light for you. The biggest selling point of War of the Ring CG is not in the team play, it's not in the fighting mechanics, it's not the deck manipulation, it's rather the raw accessibility of War of the Ring while still maintaining some cohesion of the original storyline, since the original was the most inaccessible game we've ever reviewed. If War of the Ring the card game didn't have Lord of the Rings splattered all across it, but was instead Fantasy Game 99, 2 asymmetric decks versus 2 other asymmetric decks with a cycling mechanic, it'd be pretty hard for it to garner the current attention it has. But heck, it's Lord of the Rings, and you might not care about any of the cons, if you can easily play as the Gondor player and be under attack and say, Minas Tirith is under attack, Gondor calls for aid. And then your teammate says,
And Rohan will
not answer. Remember the red arrow got forsaken last turn? Oops. And this video is brought to you by the— Yo, you said you weren't buying any more board games. You said you were recovered, man. What? Oh, this. Nice! This video is brought to you by Grinding Gamers. They're merchandise designed for board gamers by a fellow board gamer. There's currently shirts and there's plans to expand to other 3D prints for your tabletop needs. Yeah, I found the cotton to be rather comfortable, and this t-shirt right here, this kind of does describe my life. My personal score for War of the Ring the card game is going to be a 6 out of 10. I have an above average time with it. See, I love Lord of the Rings. It is still the best fantasy land ever created for me. The trilogy holds a great space in my heart, especially coming from the board game, which is one of the best board game experiences ever, but just way too unwieldy for my current day life. But my goodness, this review was such a roller coaster. So I was initially really excited for this game because I like Lord of the Rings and I like card games a lot. So this could be top 15, maybe? And then I played it and I felt some magic, but not as much as I'd hoped. And then we kept playing it, and then we thought that, wait, Shadow just can't win? Are we playing this wrong? I don't know what to think anymore. I still think the game is decent. Shadow is so hard in this game. Dude, the free people are just like crushing you to the ground though.
Yeah, no,
I always feel like I'm ahead.
Yeah, because if I'm not behind by cards, then I'm behind in an attack. If I'm not behind in an attack, then I'm behind in cards. Like,
it just feels like you don't have enough troops.
Yeah, exactly, right? Which is such a weird concept because when I was playing War of the Ring, I felt like I was crushing you in troops. Yeah. Which is how it should work, right? Like,
it's almost like you should have a bunch of dudes in reserve at all times. It just seems so blue-sided.
Yeah, maybe we're just really bad at this game. That's also possible.
No, it's just thematic.
And then we realized that the Shadow actually isn't bad. It's just the board game expectations that screwed us.
Let's see what happens. Day 7. Game 7, not day 7. Day 7. It's like day 20 years. This video. Yeah, it's really interesting. Wow.
It just makes me frustrated, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty good.
So anyways, first things first, Lord of the Rings interactions all check out for me. There is some abstraction because of how paths are flipping over or locations or how troops are just cards. But screw me, I can't help giggling when playing Frodo Baggins again and again. Or playing Gandalf, You Shall Not Pass, and with a really fun path ability. Even the Shadow feel legitimately evil and foreboding when you get to use their abilities, and especially the fun ones from Reserve, that cycle himself. This whole experience being shared with 3 other friends is a pretty cool win for me. But the enjoyment pretty much just stops with Lord of the Rings. The rest of the game is just mostly meh. To me, it's okay. And I'm really missing the dice rolling from the original War of the Ring in combat. Speaking of battlegrounds, it actually never feels like I'm attacking the other team because strongholds are dealt between players and don't have any semblance of scope within the world, so they just feel like raw points with some tacked on stats and an initial ability. And since combat is so deterministic once cards are on a place, the cards lose thematic meaning for me. They're just numbers that are tugging the location in one way or another. Then the card restrictions just really irritate me. Gimli only getting to defend strongholds through a singular card feels wacky. Or monstrous cards that you draw after the path is gone, so you use them as discard fodder or more likely forsaking abilities. Yeah, forsaking. I actually really don't like that mechanic. It feels gross to have random cards just eliminated from your deck with cards so interconnected. But also it feels terrible as a Shadow to use because I don't know what's being lost. It just feels like a gross turn where both my opponent and I feel bad. Then you know how I said I like card games? Well, this game's cycling system actually makes hand management not as nuanced as I would like, since 4 cards is actually only 2 actions. And when you draw, it's satisfying, but not as satisfying as other card games because you're quite limited in playing firepower per turn. But yeah, I actually found Shadow to be more fun due to how many more cards you draw. If it was up to me, I'd make a couple of key changes, like having an actual but simpler board, giving Mordor some initial troop setup, giving Shadow more leniency on what strongholds they can attack, and also just giving every player more card draw in general. Personally, this game feels more of a trading card game to me than it does War of the Ring the board game. And to that degree, I would have loved to see deck building as a concept, and maybe that could make this game top 20, top 30 for me. But it doesn't. Are there gonna be expansions? Expansions, please? But it's still Lord of the Rings, and so screw me, I probably have at least 3 more plays even after my 7 games before I get totally done with this. If it didn't have so many cool interactions with the great art to make the medicine go down, this game would be a 5 out of 10, and if it wasn't Lord of the Rings at all, it would probably be a 4 out of 10. You know what? This game makes me want to play the board game again. But then the board game had all these setup issues, and it's super long. Couldn't there have been like some middle ground between these 2 games? Huh. That was War of the Ring, the card game. My goodness, this was quite a journey. As I was saying in this review, I thought I had the thoughts solidified, then I had to play it again and rewrite a lot of the script. So let me know what you think of this video. Thank you to our patrons for making videos like this possible. Whew, this video was quite an adventure. It's always fun going to that War of the Ring, Lord of the Rings stuff. Yeah, again, let me know what you think, especially of the balance. I found the game to be decently balanced once you know what to do. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe. Bye-bye.